Hello Booktube, this is just a little reading update for you. I've finished 10 books, but I'm going to be all mysterious and only tell you about 8 of them because of something I'm doing later on. I also thought I'd give you a small life update because that's what I do in these videos, but really my life has been laziness the last fortnight. I have watched an incredible amount of booktube videos because everybody is making their best books of 2022. And I figure that if I subscribe to a channel and I don't watch your best books of 2022, what am I even doing subscribed to you? That is the one video a year that I have to watch. So I'm actually using this as a chance to watch people I'm subscribed to that I don't often watch, and to cull out my subscription list because I can't possibly watch all the people I'm subscribed to. There are so many wonderful booktubers, and then I've found like 10 new booktubers because the booktube algorithm is like, oh, Scott likes best books of 2022. Well, it's good for us that we've got a collection of them, and there are some wonderful new booktubers on there. I should do a little shout out video at some point maybe. I've been in a bit of a funny reading mood. I've not really known what I wanted to read, so I've got a bunch of DNFs, and they were really like try a chapter style DNFs. I have a little small problem with Libby and not being able to say no, and that needs to be resolved. But I decided to resolve that by just starting a book, and if I wasn't like completely into it, I was moving on. But I still haven't really been able to find what I'm in the mood for at the moment. I read literary fiction and I'm like, oh, I just want it to be a bit more plotty and a bit more fun. So I read genre fiction and I'm like, I just need it to be a bit more challenging and a bit more literary. I want something that gets my brain exercising. It doesn't have to exercise hard, but it wants to exercise. I want to feel an emotional connection with some characters. I want to empathize with what they're doing, and I want really good storytelling. And if a book does those 3 things, I don't give a damn if it's literary fiction, sci-fi, young adult, whatever it is. That's what I want in my reading. And I feel like that's not actually a genre. That's me going, I like good books. Can I read good books? But that's what I think a good book is. Shall I stop talking around in circles and start talking about the DNFs then? And the first book that I DNF'd this period is Manhunt by Gretchen Felker. If you're not familiar, this is a book by a trans author, and it's about a future where there are trans women hunting men to eat the scrotums of them or the testicles of them, and they're hunting a turf. And I'm pretty sure that at some point in this book, Gretchen Felker-Martin kills J.K. Rowling. Or as I call her, J.K. Turfling, because I've not got time for any of that sort of bullshit. I love the premise of this book. I really wanted to enjoy this book, but I just didn't think the writing was up to standard. Great idea, but sorry. Another book I feel bad about DNFing is the memoir of Grace Tame, The Ninth Life of a Diamond Miner. I think most Australians will know who Grace Tame is, but I don't think anybody internationally will know. Grace Tame is an advocate against the abuse of children, against paedophilia. She has done a whole lot of things to, help schools deal with problematic teachers and all this sort of stuff, and to raise awareness and to raise funds and to do all these things. She won Australian of the Year. Look, Grace Tame is a legend, and when she was awarded Australian of the Year, she got to go meet our Prime Minister, who was a scumbag. When she did it, she did not interact with him. She glared at him. She did what she was required to do, shake the hand and smile for a photograph, and then glared the whole rest of the time. And the press hated her because the right-wing Prime Minister who was all sorts of problematic. I just don't want to go into the details of why Scott Morrison is a pig, but let's just say that he is. Can we just accept that there is a Conservative Prime Minister of Australia, or well, an ex-Prime Minister now, who was a pig? Parliament really is the toilet of humanity. And she wrote a memoir, and of course I want to read that memoir because she's a legend. She's a very awesome person. That doesn't mean she can write a book. And it's quite clear that she doesn't really read a book. She's trying to write really, really pretty, and she's not. And nobody's told her that she's not. And she just needs to write simple. She just needs to tell a story. It needs to be like half the length. I really think that some editors realize that certain names will sell a book, and they're going to leave it all in, and they're not going to help those authors to write good literature. They're just helping them write literature that will sell. And that is a real problem with capitalism in the bookish world. Not exactly what I had in mind by Kate Brook. The reason I DNF'd this is I was, I don't know, a third of the way, half the way through, some significant fraction of the way through, and I'm like, this has got 3-star meh all over it. It's just not gonna go anywhere. Unfortunately, after I DNF'd it, I read some reviews, and it actually looks like it went somewhere that I didn't predict, and hands up, I got this one wrong. I was about a third of the way through, and I wasn't sure whether I was reading a romance or whether I was reading a portrait of a young girl in her early 20s who was poor and struggling with society and trying to find a partner and explore her sister's sexuality, who she's hooked up with a woman and they're coming to visit. And this sounded like, it was an interesting premise, but I wasn't sure whether it was that or whether it was just going to be a romance novel. I have nothing against romance novels, as you'll see later in the video, because I read one and I really quite liked it. But this was sort of like earlier on when I said things were either not literary enough or they were not storytellery enough. And I think this was kind of a bit short on both, to be honest. The Islands by Emma Bergman. This is a story about some Finnish migrants who moved to an island off the coast of Western Australia. I just wasn't gripped. This was one of my, I'm just gonna try a chapter, and I tried a little bit more than a chapter, and not a lot more than a chapter, to be honest. I just wasn't into it. I don't even think that this is a bad book, but I had too many books out from the library and I wasn't going to get through them all, and you had to be excellent, and it was just okay. And for my last DNF, it is Roses in the Mouth of a Lion by Bushra Rehman. And again, this one, I can't even tell you what this one was about. It didn't captivate me. I'm in a real fickle mood. I just don't quite know what I want to read. So let's talk about the 8 books that I actually finished, and I've kind of vaguely got them in order of worst to best, but some of them I'm still not quite sure what I thought of them. I just really can't be bothered ranking books at the moment. Sometimes I find rating and ranking books quite enjoyable, and I like picking apart the differences between the books, and somehow there's a comparative joy, and I can get more out of the books. And other times I'm just like, every book is good. It's just what mood I'm in at the time, and whether it's a book that works for me. And often I wonder if my high DNF rate is because I don't spend enough time selecting a good book. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. Everybody in this room will someday be dead by Emily Austen. I don't know. I didn't write down the authors, and we'll see if I get them right. This is a dark comedy. This is funny. I enjoyed reading it. Did this one impact my life in any way whatsoever? No, it did not. It is probably pretty harsh to put this one as my worst book, because Gilda is a 20-something-year-old lesbian who has stopped going to work because she doesn't want to, but she doesn't have enough money to do this. She can't pay her bills, and through a bizarre series of events ends up getting a job at a Catholic church, which she can't tell her lesbian partner about, because why would you work for a bigoted organisation sort of thing. But she feels like she can't tell the church about her lesbian partner, so she's sort of like lying to everybody. Along the way, one of the church ladies is like, I like you, Gilda, I'm going to set you up with my grandson, who then starts to call her and pester her, and she doesn't know how to get rid of him. On top of this, the only reason that she can get a job in the church is because the lady before her died in mysterious circumstances, and she finds herself a suspect of a murder investigation. This is farcical. This is very, very funny. I actually really did enjoy reading this. This is the sort of trash that I'm very happy to read as the filler books in my year. but it is a filler book. What We Do in the Dark by Michelle Hart. It's another lesbian story, actually, of a girl who is in early college or university, or it's American, so it'd be college. And she falls in love with her teacher, who is married, and she's very intelligent and worldly, and it is that stereotypical relationship, except that it's about two women. And it's a coming of age story. I think she's pretty figured out that she's a lesbian at the start of this, but she's sort of coming to terms with figuring out that she's a lesbian, if that makes sense. And I thought it was an interesting way of reimagining this stereotypical, professor is having sex with the student, and one, focusing on the student, and two, changing it from heterosexual to homosexual. And I thought that really played with the power dynamics, and I enjoyed finding out what Mallory, the young woman, got out of this relationship, her admiration for this woman, and how it was quite a big deal in one of their lives and not really that big a deal in the other one. Again, I enjoyed this, but is this going to make a lasting impression? Is this going to be a book I think about in 6 months? No, it's not. This is going to be a bit of a theme with quite a few books that I've read at the moment. Overall, this is a good book, but memorable it will not be. The Morbids by Ewa Ramsey. This is an Australian novel. It is about Caitlin. She is convinced she is going to die, and she is attending a group therapy session for a whole bunch of people who are the same, and they have nicknamed themselves the Morbids, and they talk about their lives with each other, and they say things like, I got to go to Bali for a wedding, and plane crash. 700 people die each year from a plane crash. Caitlin wants more than anything else in the world to travel, but she's going to die if she gets on a plane. That's just a fact, and she doesn't want to die. And her best friend was going to go traveling with her, but they've met a guy, and they can't, and Caitlin doesn't feel like she can go traveling by herself. As this story progresses, you start to understand that Caitlin has been involved in a car accident, and this is the cause of trauma for her, and she is being a bit of a shit friend while she gets over the trauma, and fair enough too, no judgment, but sometimes that's what happens. And her friend has been so good to her, and now it's been 2 years and she needs a little bit back from Caitlin. I thought it was a really good depiction of trauma. I thought it was a lovely depiction of friendship between these two women. And the last sort of factor in this is Kate's job is and she's a very good waiter at a very nice restaurant. She does the bar. They have a bit of a celebrity chef working for them, and he has been a judge on MasterChef, and he books it out, and they've had a bit of a past, and she finds him a bit gross, to be honest. He's constantly hitting on her, and then Tom comes into the bar and starts to ask after Caitlin, and he's just one of the customers, and he has a bit of crush on Caitlin. She's not really sure what to do with that. This is going to fit into this category of, this is a good book. This is doing what it sets out to do and is doing it well, but it's not going to be one I remember. I'm sorry that I'm repeating this. I'm not trying to put you off these books. I actually think that these last 3 books have been wonderful books that people should read, and I hope that there is enough information in this review, so if you're I think I might like this just a little bit more than you, Scott, then you should definitely buy it, because these 3 books, there's nothing particularly wrong with them. I feel like I maybe even squandered some potential 5-star reads because I don't know. The Bass Rock by Evie Wyld. And there's a real interesting structure to this book. So Evie Wyld won the Stellar Prize for this novel, which is the Australian version of the Women's Prize. But if you were just reading this book, there is nothing at all Australian about it. The Bass Rock is based in the United Kingdom. I'm not sure whether it's in Scotland or England, actually. I think it's in Scotland. Yeah, it's in Scotland. And it's based around this setting, but the time period that you're reading about changes and jumps between all these different characters. And there's often 200-300 years difference between these characters, and sometimes the characters appear in different timelines, but basically it's almost interconnected short stories, except everything is meshed up. The stories don't resolve one and then the next one starts. But all of these books, all of these individual stories rather, they get a little bit darker and they start to explore. In some stories there are women being murdered. There is a murderer out in one story. Women are being killed as witches in another story. Women are being cheated on in another story. You think that the husband might have killed the wife in another story. The husband is left. And, there's one story where you think the husband's trying to get the wife locked up in an asylum. And they're all happening in the same dark place. It's an interesting idea as a structure, because do the individual stories add to each other? Yeah, I kind of think they do, but how? I don't really know, which is always a sign of something clever, because, clever for me, which is to say of average to moderate intelligence to anybody else. There are definitely themes that exist between these storylines, but that as a story, they're not too important to each other. And you're left in certain places with some characters when you wanna you kind of just want to go, well, what's going on with that character? And then the next character starts and you sort of get more and more intrigued with that character. But I'm not really entirely sure what was going on in this. And I can't decide. This is definitely a book where setting is very important. And I tell you what, if you tell me that the strongest point of a novel is setting, that is the quickest way to stop me reading it, because I want characters, and then I want themes, and then I want plot. And if you're not doing one of those three things as your strongest, well, then goodbye. This is definitely a setting book, and I think I quite liked it, and I think that means it might be a really, really good book, but that my opinion of it might be a little bit on the lower side of average. I was sort of reading the whole thing, waiting for something to really click and to really go, this all really works, this is really good. And it never happened, and I can't figure out whether that's because I'm an idiot or whether that's because it's not there, whether all there is this portrait of a setting and portrait of these characters and the mistreatment of women, whether that is the thing between the books, in which case it's sort of well, duh, of course, I got that straight away, but, was there more to it? I don't know, and I would love to know in the comments if you've read it. Is there something that I've not got? Was it just it was creepy? Was that the whole thing? It was enjoyable to just read and puzzle out. That was something I will say about it. Best book? No, but again, very enjoyable. To put this into perspective, I read over 250 books last year. I've just made my top 10 of the year. They're the books I'm thinking about. I'm comparing these to the top 10 books that I read all 2022. Of course they're not going to be as good. These are just a section of random books. Speaking of something I quite enjoyed reading, but I don't actually think is the best book, I read the classic Lord of the Flies. This is a reread for me. I enjoyed the mental gymnastics of figuring out all the symbolism and all of that. Sorry, just quickly rewind. Everybody knows that Lord of the Flies is a story of a bunch of schoolboys that get shipwrecked on an island and then start to do horrible stuff to each other, and it's a representation of society. Yeah, everybody knows that. Can we talk about the book now? So yeah, I enjoyed seeing what the various factions represented and doing the little mental gymnastics to go, well, what if this? What if this? I'm not sure I like what Golding was saying about the world. I'm not sure I agree with Golding. I think I found it very simplistic and not very inclusive. I know that there were reasons for doing this, but we've got a white man writing a story with not a single woman in it. I question that. I'm not saying that his opinions are completely abhorrent. I'm not saying they're horrible. I just don't agree with them. I think that they are very simplistic and don't consider a lot of different things, and they paint people in better pictures than others. And I think that some of that can be forgiven because, you know, he's trying to write a novel, he's trying to write a story, and you've got to balance all these things, and it must be hard to get everything right and consider all the different angles that somebody is going to put this book through the ringer from. And did he know it was going to be a classic when he wrote it? I very much doubt that he thought it was going to be a classic because it was his first book. Who thinks that they're going to write Lord of the Flies as their first book, and who thinks that people are going to rip this book apart in their head and put it back together in all sorts of different ways? But that's what I enjoyed doing. I'm going to do a full review on this because I think that there's a good discussion to have about this book. I think that it's thought-provoking. I think that this is what really makes a book a classic, by the way. I don't think the book needs to be the best book. I don't think it needs to be the book that you enjoy reading the most. But I think it needs to warrant talking about. And very much Lord of the Flies achieves that very well, and that's why I enjoyed reading it. I was thinking about the conversation and I was having it with myself, and I was playing devil's advocate. And if you've not read it, that's why you should read it. Got to editing and I forgot a book, so I've just had to come back in here and film, but the sun is coming right in through the window, so I've had to change the angle. The book I missed was Waiting for the Flood by Alexis Wright. Alexis Hall? Alexis Hall. This is the second book in the Spires series, which is like a world rather than a series, and it's a bunch of romance novels that are LGBT. I really enjoyed the first book, Glitter Man, and I enjoyed the second book as well. It is a novella. It's quite short. It's very simple. I just needed to escape into a world, and, you know, I normally reach for like P.G. Wodehouse when I'm in that sort of mood, but I'd had this book there for ages, and I did not challenging my assumptions about romance almost 12 months ago, and I read Alexis Hall, and I really liked his first book. He has just the most wonderful writing style. He should be writing like high-end purple literary fiction, and he's writing romance, and it's wonderful. A very simple romance with very good characters, and it really points out that what I need in a book is, if I can emotionally connect with characters, I don't really care what the genre is. That does actually require a level of writing, and Alexis Hall does that, and his books are just solid, good books. I hear that since he's changed from indie to being published, that he sort of like turned down the literary prose nature, and that's a real shame because that's the selling point for me. That's what I want to read. But not everybody wants that. I don't know. I think that the majority of the market is stupid, and that you should appeal to niche markets, but I don't run a publishing business. The basic premise of this book, before I go on a rant that is completely unrelated to this book, is that a man is in a house. It's an unusual location for him. He's just broken up with his boyfriend, and he is in that stage where you're just grieving the loss of a relationship. He meets another man who is quite nice, and he's really patient and just lovely to him, really. But he's not really ready to move on, and it's that is the basis of this romance. It's almost like a lovely grieving process, this romance. I don't read a lot of romance, but I think that when I do, it's always going to be Alexis Hall. Is there another romance writer out there that writes such lovely, lovely prose? Oh, what was weird about this was that in the first book, all the kinky stuff, that was quite descriptive, he gave a lot of description, and in this book it was very fade to black, and I thought that seemed a little bit inconsistent. I gave this one 4 stars, not 5 like I did the first book in the series, but basically that's probably because it was a bit shorter and he didn't have as much time to work his magic. Alright, let's go back to past Scott that didn't start editing this video and realised he was missing a book. 2 books to go. I've saved the best 2 books for last. All My Puny Sorrows by Miriam Toews. This was the last book that I read in 2022, and it was a good book to finish on. But for a Miriam Toews book, I was a little bit disappointed, to be honest. If you can hear snoring, it's just my dog. He likes to sit in the room with me, but he can't stay awake. He's a narcoleptic, or a dog of leisure. So All My Puny Sorrows is the story of 2 sisters, and one of the sisters is in hospital for attempting to commit suicide, and the other sister is visiting her and trying to, help her get better, and she's like, no, help me kill myself. So already you know that this is going to be a sort of book that I like, because, that's catnip. It's a Miriam Toews novel, so they're from a Meta-Knight background. That's just standard with Miriam Toews books. But their father had committed suicide by jumping in front of a train. Actually happened to Miriam Toews' father, by the way. And the daughter is kind of like idolizing the father. It is a really good representation of why the bureaucratic hospital system sucks, of all the various problems that they have, of how angry Toews felt. As with all of Toews' novels, this has a nice element of humour in it. It is not as funny as Fight Night. It is much more of an emotional novel than compared to Fight Night, but it still has humour in it. She's clearly a very funny lady. It's kind of interesting when you are reading an author who you've picked up their newest book and you love them, and then you read a backlist novel and you think that's a really good book too, and then you read a third backlist novel and you realise they're slowly dropping in quality. At what point do you stop reading the backlist? And I don't think I'm done with Miriam Toews' backlist. I think that this is a really good book, and if every book that Miriam Toews wrote she got a little bit better and I'm just going to go backwards, I'm still happy to keep reading. 4 stars, not 5 stars, but a really good book. I think really though, if you've not read Toews, women talking, they're going to make it into a movie. If you thought The Handmaid's Tale was like a good idea but a little bit poorly done and a bit disappointing, then check out Women Talking. It is so much better. Don't Cry for Me, Daniel Black. This is a story of a black man who finds out that he is terminally ill, and he writes a letter to his gay son apologizing for being homophobic, but not apologizing, explaining, saying, I regret my actions, but this is why I did it. This is what I didn't understand. This was the position I was coming from. This was how I was raised. This was what I thought was normal. This was my life. This is all the stuff you want to know about my life. This is my history. This is my grandparents' history. This is so you know where you came from. And it's so wonderfully powerful because the balance of being able to be critical towards a character who is homophobic, but to also be empathetic towards where he is coming from and to show understanding of him. It is a wonderful character portrait of a man who has lived not the most interesting of lives, to be honest, but has these really horrible ideas and has slowly throughout his life actually improved, has met this woman who is in most scenes quite awesome, in one or two of them not so awesome, and he hits her and she's like, I'm not taking this, and he's like, oh, on reflection, you shouldn't hit women, but I didn't know better because that's the society I was raised in. And that kind of sounds horrible. That doesn't do it justice, but it really sort of empathizes where this man is coming from, and it shows you the systems that build up these hate, this masculinity, toxic masculinity, all these horrible features of our society. It shows you where they come from. At this point, it could have been white people or black people, it doesn't matter, but it also goes into what it's like being black. And then there are just some few really nice things, like they talk about the best way to cook a certain recipe. What he actually wanted was a good relationship with his son, and he didn't know how to treat his son like a person because that wasn't how he was raised. It's really, really sad. Incapable of meeting his son where his son needs to be, and the son just assumes that the dad hates him, and he's like, I never hated you. I was just a shit dad. It's horrible and wonderful. It's a really, really good book. It's one of these books that I don't really see how anybody could give a bad rating to. I can see if you can sit here and say what I said about a lot of the books in this video, good book, not going to make my best books of the year. If you like characters, this is a character book, emotionally dense and quite intelligent and introspective about masculinity in a way that men don't often write, in all honesty. That's all the books. Because I sort of gave you average reviews for a lot of these books, I didn't get overly excited about any. Why don't you click here and watch my best books of the year video that I posted about a week ago. Make sure you subscribe, like this video, and I hope you're reading something good. Bye bye.